It's nearly impossible to launch or scale a successful business in the digital age without an unwavering emphasis on search engine optimization, otherwise known as SEO. And while most entrepreneurs, business owners, and even digital marketing professionals try their best to avoid this topic, SEO is and always will be an integral factor in the success of online businesses and brands. The objective of this training is to lay a strong foundation and framework of SEO fundamentals in order that you can integrate proven principles into your marketing, advertising, and website optimization strategies. Based on this knowledge, you'll feel empowered to tackle your own SEO and/or make informed decisions on how to partner with the right SEO professionals to improve your brand's online visibility. So without further delay, let's dive in and learn something new. The fact that you've taken the time to immerse yourself in this training shows that you've committed to learning and improvement. Our commitment is to help you walk away with some actionable insights and knowledge. In this training, we'll touch on 4 basic categories. We'll lead off with SEO 101, where you'll learn the definition of search engine optimization, why you should use SEO, and what roles SEO plays in digital marketing strategy, and specific insights into the optimization process. Next, we'll define SERPs, explain some of the changes they've undergone over the years, touch on sales funnels and search intent, discuss SERP attributes, and highlight SERP queries. The next section will cover web crawlers and search engine indexing, where we'll talk about how pages show up in results, a tactic for finding old cached pages, how you can understand page caching, and the skinny on robots.txt, which allows you to block pages from indexation. Finally, you'll end this training with a clear understanding of search algorithm basics, including search engine history, top search algorithm ranking factors, and a look at recent and future trends. The first question you're probably asking is, why SEO? In other words, why waste your time trying to deal with something that many people find frustrating, time-consuming, and futile? After all, doesn't Google constantly change the rules? These are valid questions, and by the end of this training, you'll have clear and comprehensive answers. But for now, let's start by defining what SEO is. SEO is an acronym that stands for Search Engine Optimization. And search engine optimization is best defined as a methodology of strategies, techniques, and tactics used to increase the amount of visitors, or traffic, to a website by obtaining a high-ranking placement in the search results page of a search engine, including Google, Bing, Yahoo, and other search engines. When it comes to driving traffic to a website, you have an abundance of options, including paid advertising, social media, and email, just to name a few. So what makes organic search engine traffic the best source? There are 5 primary reasons. To optimize your own website, thereby increasing traffic, leads, and conversions to revenue. To learn the principles of SEO to optimize client websites, charge monthly retainers, and grow a digital marketing business. People are looking for exactly what you have to offer. Paid advertising. You're only guessing. You are interrupting them. For example, people want to look at what their friends are up to. They're not in a buying mode. Once you start ranking, you can consistently drive visitors to your site for free. People often compare pay-to-click advertising with organic SEO, and while both can be catalytic traffic sources, they aren't necessarily equal. With PPC advertising, there's a fixed clicks-to-cost ratio. In other words, you pay for what you get. It's a pay-to-play equation. If you don't fork over the money, you won't get the clicks. And as soon as you stop paying, the clicks stop coming in. It does very little, if anything, to improve your long-term search results. With organic SEO, there's a lot more work required on the front end, but the results are sustainable. Eventually, you can spend less time maintaining your site and your rankings will continue to improve. This leads to a cost-effective long-term source of traffic. If you're someone who likes to see the big picture in order to understand how all of the pieces fit together, you'll benefit from a top-level view of the SEO process. This will help you understand where you are on your SEO journey and where you need to focus your energy and effort. The SEO process can be broken down into 3 key phases: define, identify, and implement. These phases can be further split up into 5 steps: research, audit, optimize, amplify, and iterate. The research step is all about identifying the competitive landscape by identifying goals and keywords, analyzing the competition, and defining specific tests. The audit step is where you identify your position within the larger landscape. You'll account for indexation, accessibility, content, and authority. Moving into the implementation phase, you begin by optimizing. This includes website optimization, content optimization, ensuring you're pursuing the right topics and keywords, technical optimization, and local optimization, accounting for your specific geographical market or region. The amplify step is where so much of the work is done. It's here that you focus on attracting inbound links, building trust, and strengthening your social presence on the web. This is an ongoing step that you'll invest in indefinitely. Finally, you iterate. This is done by measuring the results you're getting or not getting, reporting, and then using these insights to improve and optimize your approach. Now, let's talk SERPs, or Search Engine Results Pages. We're all familiar with SERPs, whether we realize it or not. These are what Google gives you when you conduct a search. Let's say, for example, that you were to run a search for John Wayne. Here's what you would see. At the top of the page, you would see how many results there are, roughly 427 million in this example, followed by a list of web pages that Google believes are most relevant and trustworthy. Wikipedia holds the top spot, as it often does, followed by IMDb. In between the top two search results, you'll see a box that reads, "People also ask," followed by 4 popular questions. What kind of cancer did John Wayne have? What was John Wayne's net worth when he died, etc. These are known as universal search features, and Google displays them when deemed relevant. Each one of these dropdowns reveals specific answers with direct links to the web pages where the answers are found. But for the most part, when we discuss ranking in the search engines, we're talking about nabbing one of the top listings on the SERPs, like the ones Wikipedia and IMDb have in this example. In order to understand why SEO is important in the grand scheme of marketing, sales, and growing your business, it's important to step back and look at it within the context of the traditional sales funnel. On the left side, you'll see the sales funnel. We use the analogy of a funnel because of the simple physics of a real-world funnel. You pour something in, prospective customers in this case, and it slowly filters down to the bottom where it arrives at its intended destination, which, in a business context, is a conversion or sale. Ryan Dace, co-founder of Digital Marketer, likes to describe the sales funnel as a multi-step, multi-modality process that moves prospective browsers into buyers. At the top of the funnel, prospects are becoming aware of your brand and are in discovering mode. Then, in the middle of the funnel, they evaluate your brand and reach a decision on what they want to do. Then at the bottom of the funnel, they take action and, hopefully, develop some sense of brand loyalty or repeat purchase behaviors. SEO works really well at the top and middle of the funnel where you're focused on attracting qualified prospects. There's less competition at the top, and you can create informative, well-optimized content that educates and engages. This makes the funnel slippery, driving prospects down to the bottom, which allows you to circumvent the increase in competition and heavy ad placement. To optimize your website, you need to identify the different intentions search engine users carry. This begins with content creation. For example, optimal content differs for users searching for information compared to users looking for a product to buy. Every page component needs to be oriented towards a user's intention, including headlines, copy, tone of voice, and your call to action. Your potential customers will all be at different stages in the buying process. Some will be in the research or learning phase looking for solutions, ideas, reviews, and other information. Other people will be searching for a specific product, website, or business location. The last group of people will be ready to buy. People in this group will be your most valuable leads. Your sales funnel should be designed to capture people throughout all stages of the customer journey. Leads ready to buy will be easier to convert to a sale, but it's a mistake to ignore leads in the research phase. A strong sales funnel intentionally reaches people at every stage of the customer journey. You'll reach people at the top of your funnel with casual content and ads that speak directly to their curiosity and need to learn more. At this stage, you're not trying to persuade these people to buy your product. Your goal is to convince them you have the solution they're looking for. In many cases, you'll need to educate them before they see your product as the right solution. These are the people you'll continue to retarget. To reach people in the middle of your sales funnel, your ads and landing page content should focus on comparisons. Why is your brand or product better than others? The middle of your funnel is where you'll start finding some real competition online, especially with pay-per-click ads. Finally, the people at the bottom of your sales funnel are the low-hanging fruit. They're ready to buy and looking for a reason to get out their credit card. To reach these people, you'll want to bid on branded search queries with your ads and use buying search phrases. Your ad campaigns for this section of your funnel should be aggressive because this is where you'll find the most competition. Branded search is something many organizations often ignore, but it's essential. When a user searches Google for a brand name, the search results page displays ads above the actual search results. Your goal should be to get your ads and your website on the first page so that you dominate the ads and search results. The way you get those ad spots is by bidding on your brand's keywords. Users who don't have a specific brand in mind will search for general terms to see what's available. For example, a user searching for stationary bike will return results from all different brands in the ad spaces and the actual search results. A user searching for a general product won't be ready to buy until they find a product they determine is the right product. When a user searches for a product using your brand name, they're usually ready to buy and are looking for the best deal. In some cases, they'll be price shopping or looking for a list of features before they decide to buy. In this case, you need to dominate the ad spaces as well as the search results. You need to bid on your own branded keywords to show up in the ads above your search results. If you aren't running ads targeting your branded keywords, your competitors will get top placement on Google. The majority of purchases begin with a search online. Even customers who plan to purchase from a physical store begin their search online. They usually start by searching for any product they can find and then narrow down their options based on brand reputation. More than half of the product searches are performed on Amazon to get item specifications, see customer photos, and read customer reviews. On a basic level, optimizing a web page involves crawling, indexing, and ranking. It's critical to understand how each of these factors affects your web pages. Getting found in the search engines begins with web crawlers. Search engines send web crawlers out to explore the internet, discovering new websites and web pages. When a crawler explores a website, it will follow internal links to discover additional pages. Once a website has been crawled, any pages discovered will be indexed. Only indexed pages will come up in search results. In other words, to be visible in the search engines, your website needs to be indexed. Several factors can prevent a website from being crawled. For instance, your robots.txt file might ask search engines to ignore the website. If you're using WordPress, you probably check the option to prevent crawling while your site is in development. However, make sure you don't leave your site uncrawlable when you're ready to launch. Getting your web pages indexed in the search engines is the key to getting organic traffic. Once your pages are indexed, they're available to come up in search results for users under the right circumstances. Running a site search is the best way to find out if your site's pages have been indexed in Google. After performing a site search, if you find that some of your pages haven't been indexed, you can go through your Google Webmaster Tools console to submit those pages to be crawled. It's important to understand that search engines don't load your page in a browser. They don't see what you see when you enter the URL and hit enter. Instead, they parse the back-end code of your site. This is what they scan and index. This can be a good thing or a bad thing, since search engines disregard things like website aesthetics, but a simple technical error can prevent your site from being indexed, even if your site loads correctly for human beings. Google actively caches websites, so it's often helpful to see the last cached version of your web page. This serves as a backup in case your site is not available, and could be the latest indexed version of your page. To see the cached version of a given website, conduct a Google search for the page in question. To the right of the URL, you'll see a drop-down arrow. Click that and then click Cached, and you'll be able to see a cached version of this page. From there, you can view the full version, a text-only version, or the source code. You can also look further back in history using archive.org's Wayback Machine. With this tool, you can enter any URL and view all cached versions of that page as far back as the caches will take you. In many cases, you can view snapshots of a web page dating back many years. Just click the date you want to see, and you'll pull up how the page looked on that day in history. On your website, you can employ the use of a robots.txt file to control what Googlebot and other web crawlers index on your site. The robots.txt file is essentially an instruction manual for web bots. With it, you can stop specific bots or all bots from visiting certain pages. In practice, this is a great way to prevent Google and other search engines from crawling and therefore indexing pages that aren't ready, non-canonical pages, or pages you want to hide. Though I suggest not creating web pages with content that violates Google's terms of service in the first place. To do this, you'll first define a user agent, naming a specific bot, for example, Googlebot, or using an asterisk to make the rule apply to all bots. Then you'll either allow or disallow certain pages from being crawled, using those words as command phrases. For example, disallow :/page1. When complete, you'll upload the robots.txt file to the root of the website host to which it applies. You can only have one robots.txt file. Let's talk about the history of search. Google has gone through a lot of changes over the years, and understanding those changes can help you refine your present strategies as well as prepare for what Google might have in store for the future. Here, we have a high-level timeline exploring the history of search from around 1996 to today. Search engines began emerging as early as 1996, and by 2001, Google was developing advanced search categories like Google News and Google Scholar. Things really heated up in 2002 when Google started explicitly announcing major algorithm changes. Early search engine optimizers were forced to adapt their strategies in response to these changes in order to keep up. Then, in the 2010s, Google rolled out a series of major updates which shook up the SEO world and forced all of us to rethink our approach from the ground up. From the late 2010s on, Google has continued to roll out updates, but these tend to be smaller, less noticeable, and sometimes completely unannounced and unacknowledged. Let's take a look at some of the defining updates of the 2010s and how they've shaped SEO. Google Caffeine was all about improving the freshness or recency of content ranking at the top of the SERPs. It included a major rewrite of Google's core indexing algorithm and ended up providing 50% fresher search results according to Google's official blog on the topic. In the aftermath, users were able to find news stories, blogs, and other content entries much sooner after the stories were published. The big change worked like this. The old indexing system relied on several layers, with a core layer that updated in full every couple of weeks. The revised system allowed Google to analyze smaller portions of the index on a continuous basis, recognizing new information and adding those new pages to the index much faster. Ask any SEO what the biggest game-changing algorithm update was, and I'd bet the majority of them named Google Panda. Panda was a massive overhaul to Google's ranking algorithm in February 2011, designed to penalize sites with thin or uninformative content and reward sites with high-quality, valuable content. It also included evaluation based on the ratio of a site's inbound links and reference queries, creating a site-wide modification factor to affect individual page rankings. Up until Panda, Black Hat SEOs were using content farms and content spam as a way to manipulate rankings. But thanks to Panda's better content evaluation standards, this no longer became a viable method to increase search visibility. Millions of sites plummeted in rankings, while the rankings of news, websites, social networking sites, and high-quality blogs increased. Since then, one of the hallmarks of SEO has been creating high-quality on-site content. The year following Panda, Google released Google Penguin, an update designed to reduce spam. Penguin introduced new standards for detecting sites that violate Google's webmaster guidelines. Websites that spammed links on forum comments and those that participated in link schemes were hit hard with penalties from these new standards. After Penguin, it became almost impossible to manipulate a page's ranking by using Black Hat link building techniques. In the wake of Penguin, SEOs developed new, more natural methods of link building. It became even more important to ensure your links provide real value to web users and fit naturally with high-quality content on high-quality publishers. Adding to the menagerie of Google updates is Google Hummingbird, first released in 2013. Hummingbird presented the first full rewrite of Google's algorithm since Caffeine and introduced the concept of semantic search. Essentially, Hummingbird uses semantic analysis and evaluations of synonyms and alternate phrases to understand user queries on a conceptual level. It understands what you're meaning to search for. This is a marked difference from Google's early system, which relied on specific keywords and phrases for fetching search results. It crippled the power of keyword stuffing and weakened exact match-focused keyword optimization strategies. In the wake of Hummingbird, SEOs started developing content with more semantically related phrases and synonyms for their target keywords. After Hummingbird was a bit of a lull, at least in terms of major updates. Then Google Possum rolled out in 2016. This update was officially unconfirmed but has plenty of documentation to support its rollout. The main purpose of Possum seems to have been to diversify local search results while minimizing the influence of spam. After Possum, users began to see more relevant results based on their location, and local businesses that fall outside of official city limits began to show up more frequently for searches in and around that city. Additionally, even slight variations in keywords and phrasings for local searches began to show very different results. For example, you might see different results for Milwaukee dentist than you would for dentist Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There are other theories for how Possum worked mechanically and what its true purpose was. However, without official word from Google about this update, it remains speculative. Using these updates and others, and considering changes in technology, user search trends, and other developments, we can study the overall trajectory search is taking and speculate about where we're going from here. One of the biggest trends worth exploring is the rise of semantic search thanks to Hummingbird and other updates like RankBrain. These days, results in SERPs are more likely to match the intent of a search query than the exact words and phrases used in it. The objective is to understand real-world entities and their relationships to one another. As a direct result of this, we're seeing more natural content being developed by SEOs and more nuanced keyword research and optimization strategies. We're also seeing more conversational search queries from users, partially stemming from the rise in the availability and capabilities of voice-based search, and search features like knowledge panels to provide users with more direct information and context for their queries. Here, we can see the length of the average search query. We're still seeing the highest rate of popularity for queries with 1 to 4 words in length, but queries with 9, 10, and even more words aren't exactly uncommon. Differences between desktop and mobile devices are minimal. I expect as voice search becomes even more popular and semantic search capabilities become even more advanced, we'll see this curve shift further to the right. While the prior graph demonstrates the difference in search length between desktop and mobile searches, here we see the difference in query length between spoken and text searches. Now, speech queries are still less common than text queries, but what makes them distinctive at this juncture is the fact that speech searches are longer through the tail, dropping off more slowly after peaking at 3 words. Text queries, on the other hand, peak at 2 words and then drop off more precipitously after 3 words. Given the way we approach speech, as a natural form rather than a tool for efficiency, it's no surprise that even at this early stage, speech searches show the predicted shift right. As marketers prepare for the mainstreaming of voice search, we've been able to discern other trends beyond just query length. People most commonly use voice queries to ask question phrases, offering up queries that begin with who, what, when, where, why, and how, instead of simple phrases. Who queries are particularly popular with voice searchers, showing nearly 150% year-over-year growth early in the practice's emergence. Other terms, particularly what queries, don't perform as well, but relative rates are likely to shift as people become more comfortable with this format and adapt how they use it. Now, mentally navigating back to Google search results, let's look at ways you can rank above the #1 spot. Specifically, when generating search results for certain queries, Google will provide a featured snippet. Featured snippets receive what we call the #0 spot because the user doesn't need to navigate to a link to find their answer. Instead, it's contained in the highlighted box in one of 3 forms: as a short answer of 2 to 3 sentences, in the form of a list, or as a table. Featured snippets are a popular target of marketing campaigns, but many queries don't have a featured snippet, so it can be a challenging feature to take advantage of. Although only a small percentage of queries actually have a featured snippet as part of their results, earning that slot has its advantages, as this graph demonstrates. More than 30% of featured snippets hold the #1 position for their query, with 90% in the top 5 slots. We shouldn't overlook the fact that this ranking featured snippet link is something of a chicken and the egg scenario, though. Is an answer given the featured snippet position because it's high ranking, in which case why isn't every featured snippet #1? Or does the fact that the site it's featured on push it up in the rankings? There's some evidence for both sides, but as marketing professionals, we generally understand that featured snippets come from strong sites, and then they gain further traction by claiming the #0 spot. In other words, it's a mutually reinforcing process, which explains why so many companies make earning a featured snippet spot one of their marketing goals. Continuing to examine this question of clicks and how clicks relate to earning a featured snippet spot, here we see how people actually respond to a search. Do they click on a link at all? In many cases, the answer is no. That's because people process information efficiently, and we'll happily just skim the results page to find what we need. As a result, 57% of mobile searches actually don't yield any clicks. In comparison, all but 35% of desktop searches yield clicks. It's also worth noting that, both on mobile and desktop, only about 2 to 3% of clicks come from paid click-throughs. That means if organic SEO efforts aren't working, paying to grab a sponsored link slot isn't likely to be of much benefit. Returning to the debate from a few slides ago regarding whether ranking drives featured snippet status or vice versa, we should note that featured snippets may not actually be as useful as some think. Rather, as Google has increased the number of queries with featured snippets, we've also seen links fall overall. And as of January 2020, featured links no longer get a second mention on the first results page, part of what Google has termed deduplication. Instead, the first results page will only generate 9 links below the #0 spot. Deduplication is particularly bad news for those sites that held the #1 spot in addition to the featured snippet because, as we've learned, a greater percentage of clicks actually went to the #1 spot than the #0. Users assumed they'd already learned what they could from the featured text and moved on, so it might be time to stop competing for that supposed top position. Setting aside for now the question of featured snippets or the growth of voice search, one thing we know for sure is that the search volume is only on the rise. Though desktop searches have declined slightly in recent years, mobile search has more than made up for that small drop-off. It's clear that people are hungry for information, and, regardless of what they're looking for, our goal needs to be to deliver that information 0, which means we need to keep climbing the rankings. As significantly as Google has changed their algorithm over the last several years, the process has fundamentally remained stable. To rank a site, Google first crawls your page to check for content that may answer search queries, and then evaluates how links relate your site to other relevant content, which gives the algorithm a sense of both quality and context. Next, Google looks at 3 easily quantifiable metrics: click-through rate, time spent on site, and site speed. These all offer insight into user experience, since people don't spend much time on sites that aren't helpful or pleasant to use, or that take a long time to load. Over the last several years, Google has also increased the importance of mobile optimization in their ranking system, reflecting the shift from desktop-first search to mobile-first. At this point, if a site doesn't prioritize mobile access, it won't perform well. What's left to the algorithm? The thing about Google's ranking process is that, while certain factors weigh heavily on the ranking process, it's really looking at everything, and anyone building a website should be too. What problem can you solve? What question can you answer? At the end of the day, the sites that perform best are the ones that effectively meet users' needs with great content. There may be a lot of moving parts, but the basic premise isn't complicated, and it all comes together with the right support.